Okay, well, welcome everyone. And my name is Ken Jones, and I'm just going to give a little rundown about the War Industry Resistors Network, and then we'll get started. Many of you already know that we're a coalition of some 40 grassroots organizations at this point, and you can see them listed on our website. I'll link the website here in the chat in a minute. WIRN got started about 2 years ago. We've been doing monthly webinars ever since. This one here tonight is our 27th. So previous webinars have been on the role of the war corporations, of course, also think tanks, media, universities, even the State Department, the U.S. State Department itself. We've had webinars on the militarization and colonization of the borders, Cop City, the war in Ukraine, the genocide in Gaza. And you can find the recordings of all these webinars on our website. Our next webinar is March 20th. It will be on the military use of artificial intelligence with Frank Panopoulos. We have a pretty active Facebook group page. I encourage you, if you're on Facebook, to join us there and to share information you may know about, and especially to share if you're doing something in your local area with actions. You can post photos and articles and comments, all that there if you're on Facebook. We also have a Twitter page where a few of us post information relative to what's happening with the war industry. And finally, we have some merch. If you want a t-shirt, a spiffy little WIRN t-shirt, you can get your own style and color, and I'll post the link for that too. So that's it. That's the WIRN spiel. Thank you for all being here, and let's resist the war machine whenever we can. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate appreciate you while you're organizing down there in North Carolina. War Industry Resistors Network has always been a special group for me because resisting the war industry is what brought me into movement work, focusing up here in Massachusetts on Raytheon, the third largest private employer in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Used to be headquartered here before we moved down to Northern Virginia to be even closer to that cash. But like I said, I'm very excited tonight because we are going to be talking to two folks who did and are doing a lot of organizing out at UMass Amherst, which is the flagship state university here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The Dissenters are, well, they are a group that is really lighting things up. They're a coalition. They have over 25 different campuses around the country, actively engaged in fighting against endless war. They're an intersectional movement that connects the dots from racism to militarism to poverty, and they organize against political and corporate elites in order to create a safer, more just, and more livable world. So fits right into what we believe in here at the War Industry Resistors Network. So today we are going to be talking about the Dissenter chapter at UMass Amherst, who organized to get rid of Raytheon and other war profiteers off of the campus at UMass Amherst. So among their demands were to end Raytheon's campus recruitment, research, collaboration on curriculum, joint faculty appointments, and partnerships. And that effort is described in an article that I'll be sharing called New UMass Group Works to Oust Raytheon From Campus. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our two speakers. Ava Hawks is a recent graduate of UMass Amherst who partook in Dissenters Students for Justice in Palestine organizing efforts during last fall. She's particularly focused on how the struggle for Palestine's freedom is an indictment in the university's complicity in war profiteering, and how efforts to cut ties with defense contractors ties to a broader goal of democratizing the university. And Brianna J. is a senior biology major and philosophy minor at UMass Amherst. She joined Dissenters in this past September and immediately fell in love with involved organizing. Currently, she is investing her efforts towards the liberation of Palestine and a demilitarized world. As someone who is proud of her culture and community, she strives to create a world where all human beings can flourish without limit or fear. For right now, she's focusing on holding her own college accountable for its part in the militarization and war profiteering. So, thinking globally and acting locally in the best way. So, like I said, without further ado, I'm going to bring Ava and Brianna up on screen and hand you the mic and the floor. Brianna and Ava, take it away.
Thank you so much, Brian. I think, Bree, if you're okay with it, then we could just get started with our presentation. I'll start sharing my screen.
I'm ready when you're ready.
Okay, let me get this open then. 1 second, minor complication, just have to switch a tab. And okay, here we go. Let me just make sure this is open. Is everybody seeing what I'm seeing on my screen?
It looks great. Perfect.
Okay. Awesome. So we're going to do a short presentation just about the recent and historical context of organizing for Palestine at UMass. UMass has a really long history of radical student movements, particularly the anti-war movement, having to do with Vietnam and divestment from South Africa, but we will get into that very shortly. But yeah, this is a very short presentation talking about revolutionary student politics at UMass, and then after this presentation is over, we'll get into a longer, sort of conversation piece with me and Bree. So Bree, if you want to take it away on the first slide.
All right, thank you for that lovely introduction. Guys, bear with me. My stage fright persists even if the stage is virtual, so I'll try my best and be brave. But as you probably know by now, there's currently genocide taking place in Palestine. Israel's campaign began in response to an attack by Hamas on October 7th, which took the lives of over 1,000 Israelis. Since this attack, as of February 12th, the death toll in Gaza stands at about 28,340, while 67,611 have been injured. According to Oxfam, Israel's military is killing Palestinians at an average rate of 250 people per day, at a rate which exceeds the daily death toll of any other major conflict in recent years. Immediately after October 7th, understanding that Israel was about to launch a military campaign with the intent of punishing all of Gaza, quote unquote, flattening it, to quote Israeli officials, UMass students sprung into action. Organizing was led by Students for Justice in Palestine and Dissenters, working with the support of other revolutionary student organizations such as the Young Communist League and the Prison Abolition Collective, amongst others. However, UMass also has a very radical history of student activism and resistance. Crucial to the current activity of student radicals at UMass, this history serves as a guide and motivator. A non-exhaustive list of student movements at UMass includes the Free University City, a student-constructed campsite occupation raised in response to overcrowding in 1970, protests against the Vietnam War, specifically for UMass to sever its financial connections, marches and rallies against state university budget cuts in 1975, as well as marches, rallies, and occupations urging the university to divest from apartheid in South Africa in the late 1980s. So here we have a beautiful visual of students walking in Amherst circa 1970. You can see the beautiful sign right there, as well as a divestment march from the South African apartheid. And you can see the old chapel right in the background. Excuse the background noise, guys, my bad.
Yeah, so we have this really great and encouraging radical history at UMass. And it's something that I feel like gets sort of lost, maybe lost a little bit in sort of the history of our education system in Massachusetts, just that UMass students in particular have always been extremely politically active. That's super important, it being the state's flagship campus. And our, flagship public university where a lot of Massachusetts working class kids can afford to get their education and come here, and they get really politicized and they end up partaking in really important movements. But as far as the more recent context for our ability to actually organize for Palestine and our ability to have a support network that'll, I'll say allowed us in a sense to have 57 people be arrested and supported through that process. is because of the organizing that has been happening in previous semesters last year. So the demonstrations happening right now would not be possible without an existing network of progressive and revolutionary student organizations who have tried their hand at risky demonstrations before. The foremost example of this, the most recent example, was the Camp Out for Housing in spring of 2023, which was an unauthorized student-led overnight occupation of the campus pond in response to the growing housing crisis, which UMass still will not address. They call it a situation, not a crisis, which I find very funny. So for organizers, for all of these student organizers that helped plan this and bring this together, the Camp Out proved that risks with regards to legal and disciplinary consequences were worth taking because we could come out the other side and demonstrate our strength and the strength of our cause and the strength of our organizing to the rest of our classmates, which gives us more of a solid foundation for getting people involved in these bigger and possibly more risky demonstrations. So these are just photos from the camp out. As you can see, a ton of tents were brought together. It was a lot of money, time, and effort involved. And the kind of politics of occupation, I feel like, were sort of solidified in the revolutionary student milieu at UMass here, because we did an occupation, we did an overnight occupation, and we saw that it could work. We saw that we didn't face any particular repression because of this incident. So we took that as a sign moving forward that occupation politics at our university were a way forward. Bree, I think, is this one yours? I'm pretty sure.
Yes, this is mine. I love talking about this one, guys. So we occupied Whitmore Administration Building, and the fundamental goal of this was to present our force, was to present our power in numbers, and was to present the passion behind our movement and behind our conviction to stand for Palestine and to get Raytheon just out of our campus. So what happened was the students who stayed past Whitmore's closing time understood that they were risking arrest for trespassing prior to the building's closing. And they filled out forms with their names and emergency contacts. And from the beginning, there were two possible outcomes. UMass would either let us sit in and let the students stay overnight, or the UMPD would arrest the protesters. And we knew the latter was more likely. So the willingness to arrest was fundamental for our political statement. The situation in Gaza is urgent, and it demanded our immediate attention, namely the immediate severing of all ties with Israel and the military-industrial complex on our campus. UMass students were willing to put their bodies, freedoms, and privileges on the line because genocide and apartheid need to be combated with intense dedication. And on October 25th, protesters did not break rank as UMPD began making arrests for trespassing. Because the police brought only one paddy wagon that could fit around 4 to 5 people at the time, and long periods between each refill of that paddy wagon, the arrest process took nearly 7 hours.
Yeah, that was the most insane part. Was that they started, the building closed at 6. They started making arrests around 6:30, and there were people there until like 2 in the morning. Like that's when they finished. Was because they only had one paddy wagon, and they would arrest people, take them away in the paddy wagon, book them, then take the paddy wagon back. And that just prolonged the process. I don't know if it was necessary or unnecessary, but it certainly struck me as a tactic to try and get people out of that building. And certainly people out of the front of the building, because they threatened to arrest people standing in front of the building for being a little too rowdy in our anger at a lot of our comrades being arrested for protesting a genocide. So moving on. So as we said, there were two sort of courses of action that UMass could pursue. The first being they just kind of ignore it, or they let the students sit in, or they capitulate on some level and the students end up staying overnight and meet with Reyes the day after. Or what they ended up doing was UMPD coming in and making these arrests. So I'll read this excerpt from a really good Intercept article that covers repression on college campuses of pro-Palestine speech happening across the country. So 2 months later, after the 57 protesters were arraigned in court and placed on probation following disciplinary hearings at school, so keep in mind the layering of legal and disciplinary consequences here, university administrators banned 3 of the students from studying abroad during the spring semester. The decision, which was issued on the last day before winter break, left the students scrambling to find housing and come up with new plans for the spring semester. The sanction was out of step with the university's past practices of disciplining students in such circumstances, according to faculty member and attorney Rachel Weber, who we love, who represented the students in court. In 2016, for example, students were arrested following a sit-in as they pushed the university to divest from fossil fuel companies, but the students did not face any sanctions such as probation, so that's like a university level punishment, that would have made them ineligible to participate in programs like study abroad, Weber said. It's not like the students could look back at precedent and think, oh, we should have expected that this could happen, Weber told The Intercept. This was new behavior. So it was sort of a surprise for us because sort of understand that if you're in a building past closing, you're risking arrest for trespassing, but it was the layering of the university level and the legal charges, which came as a surprise for us here because of just the university's history of kind of letting it be one or the other, either it's university or it's legal. And it seemed here that the layering of university and academic or the layering of university and legal charges seemed intentional because one of those they could have dropped and they didn't. Bree?
All right, so I think something that's crucial to understanding our ability to mobilize for the cause of Palestine and demilitarization on our campus is the structure of SJP and Dissenters. October 7th came as a surprise to all of us, and while the actions of Israel weren't completely surprising, death and murder to that magnitude definitely was. So our mobilization efforts and organizing efforts definitely had to come together at a moment's notice. So the way that it essentially worked is that SJP is, I would say, the head, or like, I guess you can kind of, I think about it as like the brains of the organization. And Dissenters mainly focused or functioned as the mobilizing organizing muscle, considering our numbers and how many people we could mobilize and the majority of our members' organizing experience prior to this genocide. Individual members are also organized into sectors with different responsibilities just to make sure that we can function efficiently. You don't have people doing the same thing, and which causes things to move slowly on like an organizing and administrative level. We also operate on a volunteer basis. Leaders step up and down at will. This is just to prevent burnout and to make sure that we have people who are able to operate at their best because there are others willing to take on their responsibilities when needed. And another thing that's really crucial for our philosophy, especially here at Dissenters, is having a non-traditional hierarchy in the form of like president, vice president, secretary, as RSOs usually function at our school, but instead having something that's more horizontal, where members hold each other accountable for their actions and their commitments. We also like to have open and front-facing meetings with us, once again, to reinforce that transparency and making sure we're all on the same page, making sure we all agree on what we're going to do because we like to move as a united front. And in order to do that, we need our meetings to be open and front-facing. Another really crucial thing, and one that we've really like hankered down on in recent times, is continuing to dialogue about the fundamental values of Dissenters. For example, the advocating for armed Palestinian resistance versus an exclusively pacifist, nonviolent approach. And this is just to make sure that as we're advocating for these different movements, we're allowing our values and principles to kind of evolve with the changing needs of our base and the people that we're advocating for.
And I would say that, like, just in case the relationship between the two organizations isn't clear, there's Students for Justice in Palestine and Dissenters, which were two like independent organizations with like different, like they weren't related before what happened on October 7th at UMass. They were two like independent UMass branches of two separate organizations. But SJP has sort of a traditional leadership structure. They have like a co-president structure or something, whereas Dissenters is more fluid and less hierarchical. But they were able to make those structures come together for the purposes of boosting the mobilized base, the organizer base, and getting a lot of people out and doing important stuff, doing important organizing for Palestine at UMass. And I would say that like there's also, there's a component to this about looking forward and what we want to do, what SJP, Dissenters, and all of the co-organizing organizations like YCL and the Prison Abolition Collective want to do, what is so important, particularly when it comes to college organizing, in my opinion. Right now in this moment, college campuses are hotbeds of pro-Palestine activism. We've seen, because college campuses are hotbeds of pro-Palestine activism, there is consequently a huge crackdown on college campuses, both on the administrative level with Ivy League deans, presidents of universities getting hauled in front of Congress to try and justify free speech and to a group of senators, which is crazy to me. So there's a wide array of repressive actions going on nationally because college campuses are hotbeds of pro-Palestine activism. So because of that, they're hotbeds of repression. And as long as the student movement remains confined to the campus, we sort of unintentionally hand our administrators the justifications they need. So university administrators are currently performing the role of the state with regards to political repression, selectively utilizing codes of conduct and academic sanctions to punish protesters and quell dissent. Student revolutionaries across the country have made a point of publicizing the repression that they face, drawing in public support on the basis of free speech and the urgency of the situation in Gaza. In order to sustain public support for revolutionary student movements, we need to connect to broader community organizations so we can make our case to those outside of the campus. Because, when it comes to university hierarchies, we need to have people on the outside that are fighting for the mobilized student base against the administration. So that's parents, that's friends, colleagues, professional organizations, that's activist organizations, that's churches. I could go on. But basically all of these, as students, we're not just students, we have families, we have community connections, and we need to be spreading more and more outward to bring all of these things together for a solid movement for Palestine that does not stop on our campus. And I just wanted to sort of end my little piece about this with a quote that I really like, a quote by Grace Lee Boggs, who was an Asian American Marxist and feminist revolutionary. This is from her text, Organization Means Commitment. So the revolutionary cadres are always conscious of their interpenetrating role, i.e. from the masses to the masses. In other words, they are using their contact with community groups to get a better idea of the stage of development of the social forces, as well as to influence the direction of the social forces. In this interpenetrating dialectical relationship, they never lose sight of their primary commitment to the revolutionary cadre organization and the protracted struggle, no matter how pressing may be a particular issue, nor how desperately a particular community or organization may want to turn over to the cadre members the main responsibility for leading that particular community or organization. So this is a pretty serious, lots of big words, pretty serious text, but the way that I take it as being relevant to what's going on at UMass is that there are two main goals, which is to get UMass to divest from its defense contractor and war investments, and to get it to cut ties with Israel. So this is the revolutionary purpose that we are trying to accomplish. And this would be, in essence, the purpose of us trying to connect to broader social forces and get an idea of how those social forces can help us in our own struggle. And this is a relationship that goes back and forth because we're supposed to have, shared interests with, different organizations, different masses of people. Bree, if you want to close out on this quote, on this really important slogan.
I insisted we have this in the presentation. But when I first joined Dissenters, we had a lot of chants. I remember my first protest, we had like 10 to 15 chants. But there was one in particular that stuck out to me, and it was this one because I feel like it completely encapsulates what we fight for. And I'll read it for you here today. It says, "It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains." And right here, it kind of just touches on your individual right and duty, honestly, obligation to fight for your own freedom and those of others, and how, it was also your duty to win. We're not here for no reason. We're here because we want to win. We believe we can. That belief in yourself and as an individual, but also in the group and as a collective, is crucial to our victories. We must love and support one another because when you're in community, the values of love and support are the things that hold people together. It's what makes people want to join. It's what makes people want to stay committed to the movement and stay committed to the cause. And I feel as though, especially in a world like today, where things like capitalism are convincing us that our primary objective is to survive and just to amass more and more things, and our fight for our freedom is going to cost us too much. I feel like that last line, we have nothing to lose but our chains, really kind of brings it back home, because what can be more important than your liberation and that of others? So I just want to share that with you guys. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. I appreciate it so much. Thank you for giving us the floor.
No, it was our pleasure. Thank you so much for telling us just a little bit about what you've been up to. I want to invite people to start raising their hands to ask your own questions of Ava and Brianna. But before we do that, I work at Massachusetts Peace Action. It's very important that action is a part of what we do. And one small thing that you can do, and I think it's very relevant given what has happened just in the past week, is you can raise hell with your elected officials. So here we have seen just in the past week, the United States Senate has voted a package of some $95 to $96 billion. That includes $14 billion in aid. Over 10 billion of that is weapons to Israel in the midst of this war in Gaza. More accurate to call it the genocide in Gaza. Of course, we all know that the International Court of Justice has found that what Israel is doing is plausibly genocide. And 70 U.S. senators, including my own, Edward Markey and Warren, voted to send over $10 billion to a country that has killed almost 30,000 people. Some estimates are higher than that, even 70% of them women and children. So if this makes you as mad as it makes me, one thing that you can do, and it's very fast, is click that link and send a message. You can personalize it to your heart's content, but please do send a message to these folks, and send the message to your House rep too, because they'll be voting on this before you know it. Let them know that you don't support it. And I think it's important that it's an election year as well. These people do care about your vote. They will be begging for your vote. They'll be begging for your donation. Let them know that they're not going to get either if they continue to support genocide in your name.
And particularly in Massachusetts too, because Raytheon is our third largest employer. It's important not just to bother like Markey, Warren, and our state reps, but also like our state house representatives, because they have a part to play in this too, because Raytheon has such a big presence in our state. So we have a national level to work on, and we have a state level to work on in the Commonwealth, I think is really important.
That is fantastic advice. In the past, we have introduced a divestment bill at the time when the war in Yemen, although that war unfortunately is now starting up again, but when it was raging at its height, we introduced legislation to divest the state pension fund from companies that were selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. So Ava, that's a really good point. You can work at your local level to get your city council to do something. You can work at the State House in Boston. We're going to be at the State House tomorrow protesting. Or you can work on your federal reps. Earlier today, the Boston Coalition for Palestine, of which we are a member, led a march from Cambridge Common right over to Elizabeth Warren's residence to express our displeasure. About 1,000 people turned out. So make noise. It does make a difference. I'll put it in there once more. Please, if you haven't gotten a chance, and we'll send it in a follow-up email too. Just give them a piece of your mind. They need to hear it. So with that, I think I'm gonna turn the attention to the audience members and let you start asking your questions of Brianna and Ava. Important to note, we do like you to have a question as opposed to a statement or a speech. And we do encourage you to make it quick so we can get to as many questions as possible. So first up, I see Jeffrey. Let me put you on screen and ask you to unmute yourself. Your question for Brianna and Ava.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hear you loud and clear.
All right, I got two real quick, and I'm gonna make my statements very quick. One, has any of those protesters decided to actually run for office to make a big impact, if you know what I mean? And two, when you do your protest, do you think of everything from and I mean everything, so that your message doesn't go out the window and make their opponent stronger, but instead makes you guys stronger, and all that stuff, you know. Sorry, I couldn't phrase that any better.
No, those are very good questions. Involvement in politics among protesters and message discipline.
So I don't know of anybody specifically in the coalition who is thinking about running for office. I'm sure that like if you did like a survey of a lot of the individuals that are involved with Dissenters and SJP, you would find people that are interested in running for office, but I haven't heard of anybody who has vocalized it. So I can't really speak on that. In terms of message discipline, yes, message discipline is like really important. I mean, this is like the grudgy side of organizing, but there's just like, you know, last semester I remember just like hours and hours and hours of meetings, making sure that like we were doing the right protest in the right way at the right place and the right time. And like, you know, exercising, like, you know, chanting like the right slogans and stuff like that. Like, obviously, like some of that's just kind of like drudgery, but I do think it's like important and relevant to your question about message discipline, because we are consistently not just pro-peace, but we are pro-Palestine. You know, we are pro-Palestinian liberation because we, you know, all of these organizations are united in this fight, with the understanding that this conflict stems from a military occupation, a colonizing occupation by Israel of, you know, historically Palestinian lands. So that is the biggest piece of our message discipline, is that we center Palestinian liberation at every turn. You know, we call for principled peace. We're, you know, principled peace activists, where it's not just that we want Israel to cease fire and they keep occupying, you know, these historic Palestinian lands, but you know, that there is an actual like meaningful process with regards to like land secession, land for peace and stuff like that. You know, again, like I said, just like consistently pro-Palestine and pro-peace. Bree, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, just real quick, also on a practical level, what this looks like is the centering the Palestinian Arab voices that are actually in our coalition and making sure that what SJP wants done essentially gets done. Another thing as well in terms of messaging is like as it was just explaining, like with the chanting and stuff like that. Just also making sure we're not leaning into any bigoted speech that may seem pro-Palestinian but isn't. I mean, I know a popular Zionist talking point is that pro-Palestinian individuals are anti-Semites. We do not tolerate any of that language. We do not tolerate any of that thought or any of those kind of political leanings in our movement whatsoever. So just making sure that not only do we center Palestinian voices, but we also make sure to not appear to be basically the bad people that our opposition makes us out to be. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify those things really quickly.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jackie. I'm going to put you on screen and ask you to unmute. And thanks,
Okay.
Jeffrey, for
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you. So my name is Jackie Cabasso. I'm the executive director of Western States Legal Foundation in Oakland, which is a 40-plus-year-old organization working for peace and justice in a nuclear-free world. I'm also the national co-convener of United for Peace and Justice. So first of all, it's really encouraging to hear what you folks are doing. It's wonderful to see a new generation coming up and taking the reins. My question, I have two questions. One is that some of us, and I know from looking around the screen, there are many of us who've been doing this for decades. And one of the issues that we've run into working with student groups over the years is the inevitable turnover, because obviously you graduate and you move on. So I'm wondering if Dissenters is looking into kind of how to address that, how to ensure continuity, so that it's not a flash in the pan, but a movement building opportunity. And I guess related to that is that understandably you're talking about Palestine now, but in the beginning when you introduced yourself, you said you were intersectional, and we know there are a lot of other issues in addition to Palestine that need our attention. So those two are sort of, how are you thinking about continuity with Dissenters in an intersectional way? And then the second question, which is a different question, is, are you familiar with and are you connected with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival?
Bree, do you want to take it first?
Sure. In terms of the turnover with graduates, that is something that we are conscious of. And I think as dissenters, personally, we're really privileged to have quite a few underclassmen. I've been in community with quite a few freshmen and sophomores who are really excited to get even more involved and take on leadership roles. And I think with our particular structure of having rotating leaders, it gives everybody a chance to grow their leadership skills so that when I, a senior, inevitably graduate, there are people who are younger than me who are ready to take the reins and will be trained to do so for the younger generation that comes up after them. So I think we're really privileged to already have that structure set up. With that in mind, in terms of intersectionality, that's actually been one of our goals for this new semester, is how to become more intersectional, how do we address the needs of people outside of Palestine whose struggles are also connected to militarization and imperialism. And I think we're also really privileged to have a pretty diverse base who also cares about diverse issues. So we've been having quite a few conversations internally about how we achieve that. We've partnered with other campus orgs from different backgrounds and asked them how we can support them, their mobilization and organizing efforts for their diasporic issues concerning militarization and imperialism as well. And as for the organization you just named, I personally am not familiar, so I'll pass it off to Eva.
Yeah, so what Bree said. Also, I think that part of the benefit that Dissenters and SJP have as particular organizations, well, SJP is Students for Justice in Palestine, but is that they are like national organizations. So sometimes what you'll see is that like you'll get like a radical book club that like pops up at a university, and they're the ones that kind of like organize demonstrations, and then all those people graduate, and then the radical book club is gone, and like it takes maybe a year, or like a semester or a year or two to like get that infrastructure back up and running again. But what the positive side of Dissenters and SJP is that they're national organizations. Like Dissenters is a branch, like UMass Dissenters is a branch of National Dissenters. UMass SJP is a branch of the National SJP. So when we graduate, like as people that have participated in these things, we still have opportunities to connect with like the national organization and extend our organizing there. I know like particularly for the Young Communist League, which is connected to the Communist Party, there's so many organizing connections there. It's like kind of insane. Like it's served us pretty well in being able to have resources to mobilize at, as YCL, and, being able to educate people. All of these things. So it's really like the piece of it that I feel like is really beneficial for us as the older milieu kind of graduates and moves on, is that we are able to partake in the activities of the national organization. Or if we end up moving, we're able to participate in wherever maybe our closest university is. About intersectionality, yeah, I mean, so last year was basically just like Palestine, I think understandably, because of the urgency of the situation is still urgent. This year I'm not on campus, but I've heard like through meetings and just through the grapevine that like, people are starting to think about how does militarization affect communities in the US? How does it connect communities internationally? And how does it link struggles? How does the highly militarized US system connect struggles globally? And then about the Poor People's Campaign, I am not personally connected with the Poor People's Campaign, but I know what it is. I know that, it has its roots in Martin Luther King Jr. And, his extension of the struggle for civil rights. So I'm not personally involved, but I do know what you are talking about. That's the answer to that question.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. And just to expand on that a little bit, one thing that I particularly like about the Poor People's Campaign is that they really go at the issue of militarism, which, as we can all see by the quote in the background, is something that Martin Luther King Jr. did not shy away from, despite the fact that he took a real hit for it in the last year of his life for publicly opposing the Vietnam War. The way that they frame it too, calling out the U.S. economy for what it is, war economy, is very powerful. I just want to put in the chat very quickly, the Poor People's Campaign is doing a nationwide mobilization of demonstrations and protests. I'm not sure if they're all on March the 2nd. I think some may be on the 3rd. But here in Boston, and it will be on March 2nd for more information, and we will be joining them. For more information, you can click that link.
There are a couple questions in the chat I want to get to super quickly. So
Go ahead.
We had a question from Margaret Down, who said, how can we in New Zealand support you? I'm so excited to answer this question because I have so much family in New Zealand. I have so much family on the South Island of New Zealand. And I do not have a good answer to that question, but because I don't live in New Zealand, obviously, but I have a lot of family there and it's a place that's very near and dear to my heart. I will say that what I do know is that Te Pāti Māori, the Māori Party in New Zealand, has focused a lot of its current, I guess, sort of political agitation efforts around Palestine and connecting the struggle in Palestine to Indigenous rights in New Zealand, which is something, it's a great connection. It's a great analytical perspective to have. And Te Pāti Māori is a fantastic political party that is doing a lot of really good work for Indigenous rights in New Zealand and Oceania. So if there's any way that you can get involved with them, I would highly, highly encourage you to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have actually, and I'll bring Ken in here too for this, who also has a question. But we've heard from some folks down under through War Industry Resistors Network, but I think that was Australia, not New Zealand. Am I right there, Ken?
We have people who come to our webinars from New Zealand. We do. I don't know who they are. Maybe there's someone here now. I guess the person who asked the question.
But you had a separate question, I think.
Go ahead. Did you want to say something, Ava?
Oh, there's one more, and then I think we'll get to
great.
Ken's question. There's somebody, so from Matvey Mozaev, how do you manage to keep your leaders efficient and knowledgeable throughout the rotations without losing the steam or tempo? Bree, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that. Thank you for that question. It's a really good one. The way that it works is each subsection or sector of dissenters will have a kind of point person, and we'll have more than one, usually 2 to 3, and we'll have one main point person, then we'll have another one who will kind of study under them. And if somebody is interested, they'll study under the understudy person. So there's always somebody who's being trained, and that person who's being trained will eventually take over. And that person who is being trained is also coming to all of the meetings, the big ones, the small ones. So that just kind of makes sure that all the information is continuous. So yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
what Bree said, that 100% correct. That's what happens. And then we'll take Ken's question.
Okay, good. Thanks. And yeah, you shed a lot of light on what you've been doing at UMass. And you've also talked a little bit about the dissenters, how supportive they've been, and what a great combination the two, SJP and the dissenters, are. I wonder if either or both of you could shed light on the broader spectrum of the dissenters, 25 different campuses doing things. And I know that each campus has its sort of own autonomous, maybe actions and things that they do, but can you tell us a little bit about the Dissenters as a national organization, how it functions, and maybe some other things that go on other campuses?
Bree, do you want to take it, or?
I think you could take it because I'm rather new to Dissenter, so I don't know
Yeah.
much about the movement before this happened.
So Dissenters is the only, Dissenters UMass is the only Dissenters branch in the 5 colleges. I am 99% sure. Wouldn't be surprised if another branch popped up in the next semester or two, considering just how many people are involved. But as of right now, UMass Dissenters is the only Dissenters branch in the Western Mass area. Students for Justice in Palestine is a different story. There's Students for Justice in Palestine, I believe at Smith, I think there's one at Amherst, and I think there's one at Mount Holyoke. So that's 4 out of 5 colleges. And I think there's one I actually think there's one at all 5 of them. Anyways, the critical majority of the 5 colleges have an SJP. And they are all connected to one another and they all share, organizing resources. I will say that SJP UMass is kind of the head of the snake here, because they are kind of the biggest, and they have, more resources and more mobilization capabilities than the SJPs at the other 5 colleges. I can't really comment on the national, what goes on in national. I'm more connected to just the UMass campus portion of it. We have, more leaders and dissenters that are more connected to the national, the national side of things, but me and Bree aren't really good people to ask that question. So I'm sorry, I can't answer it sufficiently.
Just to give a little bit more, yeah, I can't answer sufficiently, I'm pretty new. But what I do know is I don't think that there's much crosstalk between dissenters across branches because we're so spread out, especially with us all the way in Western Mass. But there is a deep connection to the national dissenters, as Ava previously stated.
Thanks. I have a question, and yeah, obviously invite audience members to get involved too. But the struggle to get Raytheon, other military industrial complex companies, war profiteers, off of campus goes back, right? The dissenters have been working on that since 2022?
Yes. Dissenters has been at UMass since 2022, and they've focused broadly on militarism in general, because Raytheon has a huge presence at UMass, even, just beyond the genocide happening in Palestine. Raytheon has a huge presence. Lockheed Martin has a pretty significant presence, and they have been fighting that for the better part of a year and a half now, I think.
Yeah, that gets to my question. I'm wondering what's the status of the relationship between UMass and these companies right now, as it stands?
Beforehand, as we know, that the ties were pretty tight and the roots ran pretty deep. But as of recently, Raytheon is usually invited to our campus career fairs, but they were not on the list this time. I believe it was for either business or engineering, and either one is a pretty big win in my opinion because they poach a lot of our talent pool from both of those schools. So I remember before October 7th happened, one of the first things I ever did was kind of crash an info session. And it looks like all that crashing has worked because they have not expressed a desire to come.
Yeah, the part of some of the biggest, most visible things that that dissenters would do was our job fairs, which are for particular sectors of students. So it's either business or engineering students. They'll have big job fairs for those students, and Raytheon will often be there. Raytheon, as Bree was saying, Raytheon will have info sessions. We've interrupted those. And it just looks like they are not keen on coming back right now. And it looks like that's currently what their prerogative is. It doesn't look like UMass. It seems like from the sort of relationship that we're able to glean based off of administrator statements and conversations we've had, legally, UMass can't just unilaterally kick out Raytheon or Lockheed because they have legal business binding contracts with them that would violate, asking them to leave would entail violations of those contracts. So really it kind of falls to the onus being on us to make it as uncomfortable as possible for them to be physically present on our campus. But that's only one piece of it. The info sessions and the job fairs are only one piece of it. It's really you want, there's research going on, there's, cross trading between faculty and staff and all this stuff. So that's really another big piece of it that we are trying to make a dent in, but it's difficult because of the legally binding, business, contracts and business that UMass does with Raytheon and Lockheed and these other defense contractors. I think we should tackle, there are like 3 chat questions that I'd like to get to.
Great, please.
Yeah, so Mary Ellen Kirkoulos asks, if you've not covered this already, are you connected with the struggles of Indigenous communities and movements here on Turtle Island? I will say that in terms of the actual tangible connections that we have, right now we're not connected to any Indigenous groups that are active in Western Massachusetts. But the Indigenous, the perspective on Indigenous rights is something that we sort of keep constant. Because we understand, the struggle for Palestine to be a struggle of Indigenous people to return to their land and have proper rights over it. And then from W. Brown, do you coordinate with activist students in other New England schools beyond Massachusetts? I'm trying to think. Because I can think of a few other schools, but they're all in Massachusetts. Like we've had connections with Brandeis's struggle against university censorship on their campus. We've passed petitions around and passed, information and resources around between various schools within Massachusetts, but I don't think we've made the broader connection to schools outside of New England yet. Bree, do you have, or schools outside of Massachusetts and New England yet? Bree, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think that we are kind of like loosely and tangentially connected with other student groups outside of Mass, but our support is more so in boosting their content and expanding their information to our base. Like Ava said, I don't think we have those deep ties quite yet, as we're still trying to like really establish ourselves in Massachusetts.
Yeah, what we saw at UMass was just like an explosion of people that were interested in getting involved with this stuff. So what we've been doing is, if there's an organization that we can get in contact with, like over social media or something like that, we try to share, like we have people that we can connect like your petitions to, your, get people out and supporting your, your protests, your demonstrations, all this stuff. So that's kind of what we've been trying to do. But like I said, sort of earlier in the presentation, the extending of organizing is so important. And I think that that's another task that can be vastly improved upon this semester and this upcoming academic year. And then a question from Felice Cohen-Jopa. Whether or not individuals or groups support armed struggle, I'm wondering whether during an action where people are risking arrest, is there a discussion or agreement to not engage in violence during the action? Yes. The rules are very clear, is that you are getting arrested. You do not struggle with the cops any more than you have to, in the sense that like you don't want to get handcuffed or zip tied, but it's going to happen. There's a very solid sacred agreement, no property damage, like nothing of that sort. So there's a very solid grounds of nonviolence to, and that includes like bodily harm and property damage when it comes to these risking, these demonstrations where we risk arrest. What does Raytheon oh, actually, hang on. There's a few. All right, so we have 2 questions from Jason Cohen and Dean Nievert, so I think we'll take those before we go to the rest of the chat questions.
Great. I will ask you to unmute, Jason.
Hi, comrades. Thank you for hosting this webinar. I actually worked at the Dissenters in New York City. I'm a member of CUNY for Palestine. And we've been dealing with a lot of oppression. So honestly, one of my questions already answered, regarding if you guys had made contacts with other universities like, Boston University, Brandeis. So, part of that question would be also, have you guys tried interacting with the community? Because that's been one of the, the CUNYs are all in Manhattan, Brooklyn, the main city areas. See, that's, I feel, is one of the barriers that we are trying to overcome now, because it seems that the university really loves the idea that it's an atomized, it's an atomized space that's supposed to be disconnected from everywhere else, in order for them to really, put pressure on the students in certain disciplinary actions. So yeah, that, and just because I'm into it, I do a lot of Pan-African organizing. I was wondering if there's been, you know, pushes to kind of try and connect the Palestinian national liberation struggle to the current struggles we're seeing in the African diaspora and, you know, just what's going on in Africa right now, all the populist struggles against French neocolonialism in West Africa.
If you don't mind, I can take this one first. So speaking to getting involved with the community, UMass Amherst Dissenters had actually, and I believe SJP has joined a Western Mass Coalition for Palestine. So through that, we've been able to make connections with our JVP, our PSL, and stuff like that. So I believe we've kind of found our footing in terms of getting involved with the community and staying involved. I find that it's not so much making that initial contact, but keeping that working relationship like strong and healthy. So as much of us as possible, we'll go to their rallies and their actions and we'll support them. And then they'll come and support us whenever we ask for it. And we're incredibly grateful. And there's just a lot of support going on behind the scenes, as well as we have like older members who are college graduates or in a higher age group, and the wisdom and the mentorship they impart on us is so helpful and so greatly appreciated, at least for me personally. I don't know, I love talking to them. And in terms of Pan-African struggle, especially for African countries who are under French imperialism, that's personally very close to my heart, considering my cultural background. And we have actually made connections with our Black student organizations, particularly our African student organization and Black student organization, trying to create some connections with them and try to organize actions around the liberation of these countries and of this area of the world. So I would say on both fronts, these are still very big works in progress, but we are progressing nonetheless.
What's the E in AACE stand for? Do you know?
AACE?
Yeah, African American, because that's one of the groups that's really has like it has people in dissenters, but I can't remember what I can never remember what the E stands for.
That's such an excellent question.
There's a particular group. It's African American cultural. It's AACE. I cannot remember what the E stands for. But they have a very like solid presence in dissenters. And they have for a while. So that's one piece of the connecting this organizing to Black struggles. That I think is really important.
100%. And like as you previously stated, our organizing has been extremely Palestine focused because of what's been going on. But as we're trying to kind of reassess and reflect and make sure we're doing all that we can for as many people as we can, you're definitely looking to broaden into diasporic struggles for Africans.
Fantastic. Should we go to D?
Mm-hmm.
All right, D, if you can unmute yourself, go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, one quick question. It sounds like you have a really strong organization there, and I'm proud of that and happy for that. I'm wondering if you guys face any backlash from fellow UMass students who are, anti-Palestine, Israeli Zionist. And if you do, I mean, if you're fortunate, there's not a lot of pushback. But if there is pushback, I'm just wondering how you diffuse that or how you deal with it. I think that's a fair question.
We've been fortunate in some ways, unfortunate in others. Fortunate in the sense that the backlash from like outright like pro-Zionist, pro-Israel students is like limited to like 4 guys who will sometimes show up and just kind of hang out in the background and like look kind of embarrassing, which is their problem, not ours. So that's like that's the place where we're like fortunate in a way. But then in other ways, those people are also like some of the most aggressive, bloodthirsty people I've ever seen in my entire life, like most anti-Arab racist people I've ever seen in my entire life. Just like the stuff that they say on social media, like it's very scary. And it's scary also regarding like, they publish like threats online directed at specific like people with like names and faces and pictures. And we have evidence of that. Like in particular, SJP has like a 100-page document with all of that evidence, and the university has not acted on it. The university has not acted to keep any, members of the Arab student community at UMass safe, particularly like Arab student leaders in SJP, which is extremely concerning. So yeah, I mean, we have faced this sort of like pushback. It's heavy pushback, but from a comparably small portion of the student population, I would say. very concerning, but with regards to the validity of our cause at UMass, we don't really have any worries about that because there's not really that many of them.
I 100% second that. And I find another thing that I could say I find concerning is it's not like wow, I'm struggling to find my words now, but I would say a larger population isn't like those like kind of like crazy violent like militant Zionists, but students who are kind of quietly Zionist and kind of quietly attempt to kind of invalidate the movement, invalidate our position, invalidate the struggle. And I mean, it's like one of those things where people who are, in the center and moderates end up being kind of like the biggest enemies of, not enemies, but like opponents of the cause, because there's that general apathy. It tends to be a big problem, at least to me. For me personally, I take really big issue with it. It's hard to deal with, especially when you're trying to do things like, canvassing, political education. I find like peer-to-peer, person-to-person, and personal relationships is kind of the greatest ways to grow base, talking to people, trying to get people, involved. Encountering that has like kind of been a big thing for me personally, at least with my sector in Dissenters.
Yeah, there's definitely a larger base of just quietly pro-Zionist students and, people in the UMass community. But I think that Dissenters and SJP, as far as like confrontation goes, like they don't really like bother us outright, and we're not into like bothering them. It's really just like there's like agents provocateurs that are part of that milieu that like make life difficult for us. But like I said, there's not that many of them. So it's like this outright like violent Zionism is really scary. The quiet pro-Zionism is a problem. But it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't really damage like the strength and the validity of our cause on our campus. And then, so I'm going to get to some of the chat questions. So we have a question from Jackie Cabasso. What does Raytheon contract for with UMass? The biggest thing that they contract for is that they give discounts on graduate programs. So if you can apply to a graduate program in the business school, in the Eisenberg School of Business at UMass, and you can get a 10% discount on tuition through Raytheon, which is insane to me that like they're allowed to do that. They offer like, there's research projects that they do. I'm struggling sort of I have a web page up that sort of has a list of, they do tuition assistance is the big one. I cannot believe that they are allowed to do tuition assistance. And it's a pretty like easy track, especially considering the amount of job fairs that Raytheon does, for UMass students to go from their engineering or their business or their whatever program at UMass straight into working for Raytheon. So there's the formal contracts in terms of the tuition discounts and the research that Raytheon and Lockheed Martin do at UMass. And then there's also just like, Raytheon is a big employer in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They have job fairs. They heavily recruit out of UMass. So those are the two big, contracting issues.
Yeah, I was particularly interested to hear about some of the original demands. If you could just elaborate on them. You were asking for no collaboration in the curriculum and no more joint faculty appointments. Both of those sound very concerning to me. I can understand, but could you describe the problem a bit more, the state of it?
Yeah, I mean, or Bree, do you have anything you want to say? Sorry, I don't want to take it over. I mean, the joint faculty appointments is mostly just that we get like engineering professors in particular who come out of working for defense contractors, and obviously like, they are hired on the basis of their merit as engineers working for a defense contractor, but there are political reasons behind what they do. There's a political purpose behind what they do, and just from anecdotal evidence talking to engineering students, there's some pretty implicit politics that are slipped into some of these engineering courses that can make it a little bit uncomfortable to think about. It's not necessarily that these kind of faculty appointments that come out of defense contractors are these people show up in a Raytheon t-shirt and they're like, you guys should all go work for Raytheon. I loved it there. It's just like, we know what's happening. Like it's sort of like an implicit political thing where it's like, we don't want these people based on like, their track record of the time that they spent at Raytheon and the department where they were working and what they were probably working on, it's very uncomfortable that they would be teaching UMass students and setting them on a similar path, just because, we are politically opposed to the war machine, and these are people that perpetuate it and who direct students on a path to keep perpetuating it. Like that's really the biggest piece, is that we find that these faculty and staff appointments, these contracts, these curriculum collaborations, research collaborations just put more and more UMass students on the path to keep perpetuating the war machine. And regardless of what somebody chooses to do after graduation, that's their own prerogative. But what we find that UMass is doing is, through all of these collaborations, they are propping up that path. And we want them to stop doing that, because there's so many better things that they could be setting students up to do post-graduation with their engineering, business skills, all of these STEM skills that are going to be so important in the world, the world that we want to live in, creating a sustainable world that we want to live in that is not fueled by war. This is a crucial piece of actually transforming the world that we live in, and a necessary piece of it. So, from a certain perspective, they need to be gone like yesterday, because it's not building the world that would actually benefit these students and their children later on in life. At a certain point, you kind of have to think about it from just beyond a career perspective. Not that sustainable careers aren't insanely profitable, especially for some students, but the career aspect is a big part of it.
Anything to add, Bree?
I honestly couldn't have said it better myself. It was very
Fantastic. Well, if there aren't any more questions in the chat,
I think there's one more.
Is there one more?
How have you managed to prevent burnout in terms of student engagement, which is a trend on a lot of other campuses? Students rally a lot for a little while, get exhausted, and abandon the cause. How do you nurture a sustainable way of communal action? Bree, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I think a way that we kind of mitigate burnout and like try to prevent it is reflection, especially after big action, so that we make sure we're setting ourselves up, not doing things for the sake of things, but we want to do things that are effective. So I think that's the way that prevents burnout, because when people know that their energy is going towards something that like has a chance of working, and we're not doing things just consecutively, I think it gives people an opportunity to kind of rest. After big action, something that we'll do is we'll reflect, and then we'll kind of prioritize like smaller action and other things behind scenes to kind of prop up our bigger actions in the future. We also really try to prioritize well-being and mental health in our group, as for individuals, or all individuals, and as a collective. So we have things that we do to kind of improve our wellness, and we implement mental health practices, community building practices, making sure people feel loved, supported, appreciated, because that's a big way to help people stay energized and have like that mental and emotional stamina, especially for those really draining actions that inevitably kind of come down the pipeline. So we're trying to take care of ourselves as a group and as individuals. If people need to take a step back, then that's fine, because they're more than likely somebody willing to kind of take their place. We have a model of like, kind of people being willing to do what you're not able to at the time. And when it's time for somebody else to take a break, you kind of pick up the mantle for them. So there's that kind of community support as well.
I will also say, like, just a quick answer, a smaller piece of this is that for organizations that are sort of like, sort of the auxiliary organizations like the Young Communist League, tends to be what YCL focuses on is like longer term campaigns. So what we're able to do with like our people is like we're able to immediately support like SJP and Dissenters in the demonstrations that they're doing. But then we also, like, as a club, the perspective that we take is like, how is this in service of like a longer term campaign of, for example, democratizing the university? So that helps our members at the very least like maintain sort of a perspective on what they're doing, and not like crash and burn after a couple busy weeks. Yeah. And then there's one more person who has their hand raised, I think.
Yeah, Pocky from Western Mass. Let me bring you on the screen. She is from your neighborhood.
Cool.
Yep, you just have to unmute yourself, Pocky.
I tried to do, oh, there we
Yeah,
are.
there you go.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm so proud of you, because we've had such a great history here in Western Mass of activism, and it was pretty quiet for a number of years.
Yeah.
And It's thrilling to my old heart to see you all and to stand with you. And I'm particularly happy that you're part of the Palestine Coalition. And we'll just keep going. And God bless you, young people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pocky. Very encouraging. I needed that.
Well, what a positive way to end it. Thank you so much, Pocky, for that. Before I let you go, I have to ask you, Brianna and Ava, what's coming up, and how can folks on this call and in the movement at large support?
Brianna, I feel like you probably have a better idea of the day-to-day right now than I do.
Okay, so we've recently had our first big general body meeting to try to reintegrate members, trying to restart up our different sectors. What's coming up is we recently politicized the trial of the 57 students who got arrested. It's titled Raytheon on Trial. Our most recent victory is that the charges were, I believe, dropped for like a misdemeanor, it's like a civil infraction, guys. I'm not too good at the law terms, but something around that lines. Ava, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, it was dropped from a trespassing charge, which would have been pretty serious if the fighting a trespassing charge is like a pretty reasonably serious deal for a college student in court, to a civil infraction, which is basically a parking ticket. And it looks like it's also going to shift from like the jurisdiction of like Belchertown Court to like UMass itself. I'm not sure about that.
Yes, that is
It's
true.
interesting if that is what ends up, if that is actually the case. But I think the goal for, you know, even just fighting the parking ticket charge. I mean, you go to fight a parking ticket charge with political motivations anyway, right? So, you know, makes sense. But the goal with regards to fighting the charges is it's a similar idea of how UMass students, Jimmy Carter's daughter in particular, got the CIA kicked off of our campus a few decades ago. The idea is to put Raytheon and the defense contractors that are present on our campus on trial to make the case that this was, you know, an urgent act of civil disobedience in order to end our university's complicity in unrestrained criminal, you know, war criminal military aggression amounting to genocide in Gaza. So that is the political intent of fighting the charges. So those dates, I can send them to Brian. I don't know if it's like an email list function, but if you guys get emails like after these presentations, we can get the court dates to you guys because showing up for those will be really important.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, we'll be happy to send our people in the area out to support.
Yes, if you guys also are in the area, just kind of reaching out to us via I don't know if our Instagram is going to be linked or any of our contact info, but we would really appreciate being able to kind of meet up in person, kind of link up and be in community in person, being positioned together. If we could get your support for our on-campus actions and support for our actions in the greater Amherst and Western Mass community, that'd also be pretty dope and awesome. We also disseminate quite a bit of information, so kind of getting as many eyes on our stuff as possible would also be really amazing. Yeah, so that's all I have right now.
Yeah, I know that there are several people from Western Mass on the call that will be extremely interested in that. Ken, I think I'll bring you back on just for a second to help me say farewell and good night. I'm going to put in the chat the link to register for our upcoming webinar in 1 month and a day, March 20th. Can you tell the people a little bit about it while I put that link in here?
Yes, indeed. So March 20th, we're going to have Frank Panopoulos, who has written an article, which I'll send in the follow-up email, announcing this next webinar about the military's use of artificial intelligence. And this includes robotics, robotic autonomous machinery, like drones, and also brain chips, like things they're doing with soldiers to connect them to computers. So it's a little scary. And it looks like this is sort of the wave of the future for the military and wars to use drones and artificial intelligence. We can see that Israel's doing it with their targeting in Gaza, for example. So this will be right up our alley in terms of figuring out what the military industrial complex is doing and what the war corporations are doing as well. So yeah, thanks for this opportunity, Brian, and I hope you all tune in. We will send an email message out afterwards. It'll have the recording link, whatever links you get, Brian, that you want to, or Brianna and Ava, you want to send them on to us. In a couple days, we send this follow-up email out. So let's look for that, everybody.
Yep,
And
and I'll definitely get all of the, all the ways that you guys can support SJP Dissenters and all of the revolutionary student organizations at UMass. I'll get that, make sure that gets into the email.
Thanks, you all. Great. Appreciate you.
Thank you
Yeah,
guys so much. Thank you so much, Pocky, for your kind words. Thank you guys for having us. We really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you for listening to us go on about our organizing for an hour.
We appreciate your time, and we really look forward to future collaboration and ongoing solidarity.
Thank you so much.
Have a fantastic night.